Well, here we go again with another video specifically about South African building types. Last session we focused on a cot house, a house often found alongside a lake or the beach, which is a very simple structure with a slanted roof. Although this was quite a modern structure, in today's session we're going to take a look at some more historic, older structures from the South African landscape. And we're going to specifically look at traditional Zulu residence, which is a honeycomb-styled grass hut. Now, this is by no means an archaeological or historical driven narrative. There's no strong research being done here. I'm purely going on some aesthetics and a hint here and there of some details that I found in a wonderful book called Rural Shelter by Franco Frescura. It is a slightly older book, but it gives a wonderful representation of building methods in South Africa. So without further ado, and with having said in advance, I'm certainly no scholar of this building type. Let's create a visualization of this building. So the grass huts of Southern Africa are generally known for not being the tallest kind of structures. So what we're going to draw is a honeycomb styled basic structure, and I'm going back and forth in this book just so that I am hopefully describing it correctly to you, piece by piece. So let me already rephrase, not a honeycomb structure, but a beehive hut framework. And between the Sotho, the Zulu, and the Xhosa, these structures were all slightly different. But what we're going to try and do is to stick to the Zulu structure. So let's set out a ground plane on our SketchUp model, and I'm going to draw a rectangle, and I'll draw this, let's say 8 meters by 8 meters. And I'm going to give this a bit of a thickness using the push-pull command, give it a thickness of 500. And then I'm going to select all the faces by triple clicking. I'll go to my material list and look for ground cover, landscaping, fencing, and vegetation. All right, let's look for something that represents soil. The vegetation bark, that looks quite nice, but it's maybe a little bit too grainy. Small aggregate, maybe that's a good color. No, that's a bit too fine. Let's actually go through the 3D warehouse, type in the word soil. And then once we have searched for that, we'll click on the subsection materials, and we can find a texture here. I generally tend to look for textures that are, let's say, 1024 by 1024 in pixels, so something like this here, and anything under a megabyte. That way your model will stay relatively fast, and this texture is here, but as you can see when I zoom in, it shows the texture in detail. And when I zoom out, I get the feeling that the texture scale might be a little bit too small. 25 by 25 millimeter I see under this material editor, and if I increase that by 2.5 by 2.5 meters, my rocks are now, let's measure one of the rocks. My rocks are now 54 millimeters, so 5 centimeters. Yeah, that's not too bad. This is probably quite realistic. As we can see, this texture does have a little bit of a pattern in it. The one corner of the texture seems to show this patch of vegetation, so it becomes a little bit obvious. But without trying to address that in greater length, we're going to put some vegetation, some grass, maybe a little bit more rough grass. Yeah, maybe something like this. We're going to put some grass on top. So let's say that this is the place where we're going to build our beehive-styled hut. And so what one would do traditionally, as far as I understand this method, one would set out a circle using a peg and a rope, or a grass rope in case one doesn't have string. And so we're just going to draw a diagonal line on our square so that we have a reference for when we draw a circle. And we're going to set our circle out by, let's do 3 meters. This did not draw a circle. Did I press the wrong button? There we go. That is then 3 meters. And that would be the diameter of 6 meters and a radius of 3 meters. And let's take dear Teddy and put her inside the hut for a moment. Yeah, the scale of that looks pretty right. This would be regarded as a bigger hut. Most huts would probably have had a diameter of 4 meters with a small entrance that one would have to crawl through. So for now, what would happen in this hut, placing Teddy diagonally, you can see the move tool starting to snap to my diagonal line. So that's quite helpful. If you ever have to inference something that you're moving, I can inference with the endpoint, with the midpoint, of course the opposite endpoint. I can also inference with the center point of the circle. And for now it is referencing the parallel diagonal line. So here's a circle, and it looks quite segmented. The division of the edges that form the circle is currently 24 segments. So we can increase that to 48, or we can, for example, decrease it to 12 just by typing that in. And by finding a relatively simple number, we can draw the corner posts of the beehive. And at the moment, with 12 segments in the circle, the posts would be 1500 millimeters apart, 1.5 meters, or let's say roughly 4 feet. That is quite big. So let's go back to the edge of the circle. Let's change the segments from 12 to 24 again. And then our segmentation should be the half of 1500, yeah, about 800, 780. Maybe that's still a little bit big. Let's go for 36. Now the distance is 500. So just half a meter, pretty much the length of your elbow to your fingertips, or I suppose 1.5 feet. All right, so with that distance set, what we can do is we can take this development slightly further, and I'm making copies of each time that I make a change, just so that we can at the end look at the process of building this kind of structure. I'm going to copy this circle by cutting it, Control X or Command X on a Mac. I'm going to remove the diagonal line, and then I'm going to into this group and then paste it in place. And the paste in place command is here, edit, paste in place, for which I have set the shortcut Ctrl-Shift-V. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to press the B for the paint bucket, press the Alt key on a Windows computer or the Option key on a Mac to sample the soil and then paint the soil on my circle. So what one would do by building one of these huts is, of course, remove the grass so that the topsoil is revealed. And then from there on out, we can apply our foundational layer. And the foundational layer, as well as I understand it, is a layer of dacha, which is a mixture of cow dung and mud. The cow dung, of course, has some fibers left in it, so that creates quite a nice composition together with the mud, providing strength to one another. And the mixture can be smeared onto the ground. The soil underneath the dacha can be compacted beforehand. So what we're going to do is we're going to copy this, the shape, this circle. We're going to exit this group, and we're going to paste in place the circle again, and then use the push-pull command to drag it up by, let's say, 100 millimeters. And then we're going to triple click that selection or that object and then make a group out of that. So now we have a group of our ground surface, as we can see here, and we have a group here of our raised floor. And the raised floor is floating somehow because I drew my circle off the ground. That is quite surprising. How did that happen? No, the circle is just floating. So the circle is floating. Did I draw it at 3 meters across though? Yeah, okay, the dimension is correct. Well, the floating circle can be addressed. We can select the bottom edge of the circle, drag it down until it influences the face, and now it sits on the ground surface. We should probably correct that mistake here. Make a group of that circle, stick it on the ground surface, or maybe not. Let's let it float, otherwise it interferes with the texture of the grass. So there's that foundational layer, and what we now will do is we will now we could look for a material in the 3D library called dacha, and I'm afraid that we wouldn't find anything. No, that does not represent the clay mud cow dung mixture that we are looking for. So let's do a light cement. Let's do a cement. And maybe a very rough, actually this texture here seems to have been sort of the roughest texture that we were looking for. We're going to paint that object. We'll double click, select all, then paint a dacha floor. This texture does not repeat very neatly. Okay, let's go to brick cladding and siding, stucco white, and then let's take the stucco white, go to the RGB module, and try and see if we can make this a little bit more brown. Yeah, a little bit more brown. And historically, what one could do was one could mix in between the cow dung and the mud, one could also mix in blood. So you could create, of course, then various pigments of your floor and your walls using this building method with the mixture of materials. So now that we have a slightly raised floor, there are two methods of construction as far as I understand. And the one method of construction is the dacha floor with a sapling frame or a timber post frame. And the second construction method is to have the dacha floor together with a dacha raised wall. And I assume that the raised wall would be helpful because then that way it provides better wear and tear against the rain. So let's make that 150 to 200 millimeters. And we've basically drawn the circle. We've copied the circle from the floor. We'll delete the center so that we're left with the ring. And this was generally drawn, or not drawn, it was generally created somewhere between 500 and 1.5 meters in height. But approximately overall, it was just under a meter. So let's make it 900. And what probably would be wise is at this stage to cut an opening. So what we can do is we can actually measure back from the center and then cut a radial line. So we can set a radial line at, let's say, 15 or 20 degrees. My line snapping is set to 15 degrees, so that's why it goes from 15 straight to 30, but that creates quite a wide opening. And if we actually go from endpoint to endpoint on our segmentations of the circle, we can select it here, and we only want to copy that, please. and we can set it on the opposite side as well. So now if we continue to draw this line, you can see my line becomes pink. It extends the edge under the same angle. And we do that on opposite side as well. And then we can delete this edge, and then using the erase tool we can delete our reference lines. And then using the push-pull tool we can create that entrance. I do get the feeling that this entrance is very wide. This is a 2-meter entrance. Probably a meter or 1.5 meters would have been enough. So you can see the inferencing is still giving me a dashed line back to the center. So we're still drawing in line with the radius of the circle. Okay, now we have a measuring on the inside. We have a 990, so just under 1 meter in size. Okay, I'm going to leave these lines here in case at a later stage you want to remove this. But now by doing a triple select, we can make a group so that we can separate the wall from the floor. So just to illustrate, we now have these 3 elements. And actually what we can do is we can make a copy of this segment and delete the wall here to show that the floor is the next step after compacting the ground, and then the wall is the next step after having built the floor. Now the wall couldn't have stood on its own, or even in present day time these structures are created oftentimes out of adobe bricks or even out of cement bricks. But in the traditional manner, we should have continued also with our timber posts or our saplings, which are interwoven with the wall structure, meaning that the timber post and the dacha are filled in between each other. So let's for a moment hide our wall, and then on top of our circle, let's reference our circle again. We can set out, just going to set out some guidelines. This was that guideline that we had drawn earlier, where we're drawing now in 20-degree segments. And if we do that in between, we're doing it in 10-degree segments when we cut it into 36 pieces. So 36 segments on the edge. Our timber post will sit in the center of the wall. So let's unhide the wall. Let's reference again what was the thickness of that wall, 150. So let's draw a 50mm radius pole or timber framework, and then let me make sure I'm saying this correctly. And then if we go, let's say 1.2 meters up, and we make a group out of this, we can go to the edge here and then put it on the edge. Now the post is 100 millimeters, the wall is 150. So if I move it 25 millimeters over, unhide the wall, then this sits now in the center. Yeah, this is now in the center of the dacha floor, well, the dacha wall. So moving it back, this is 25 millimeters across, and this is 25 millimeters across. So if we now select this post and rotate it from the center of our building, you can see wherever we rotate it to, it will remain in the center of the wall. So let's make that first step. Let's move it over 10 degrees, and let's make a copy of it. And we can now extend that copy function, and let's say we multiply it by 35, and then we get all the posts created in the structure. Now this post of course would not be here so that you can enter the building, and these would be the timber posts. The timber posts of course at the moment are not going anywhere, which doesn't make sense. We need to create a framework that represents the beehive, that represents the dome of our structure. Let's go back a few steps and let's make this group a component. So I'm going to right click my groups and make component, and I'll call this timber post. And then let's go into that component. Let's go to our wood material selection, and let's select something that represents, in this case, cherry or pine. Let's do pine. Let's just paint the whole texture, the whole material the same. 10 degrees again, multiplied by 35, removing the center post. And these would be our posts in the structure. However, we now have a component, so we can make changes as we go. In the beehive structure, or in the what was the other name for it? Sorry, this was the Zulu structure. In the Zulu structure versus the Xhosa structure, or even the Sotho structure, the use of the saplings and the timber frame varies. So what we have now done was set up the Zulu frame, where we have the center at 6 meters. We have the sapling framework, the timber posts. But what we could now focus on is to continue with a radial structure. But if I'm correct, that is actually a Xhosa beehive framework. And anyone who knows this way better than I do, feel free to leave a comment clarifying this. I have just drawn a line of 3 meters vertically as a reference point, because what we could do is we can even draw a rectangle from that center point again. And I'm setting this up. Let me just make a copy of this so that we don't destroy all our hard work by accident later on. For here now, we're going to delete the posts, not our square. For here, we want to draw an arc, so that's why we've created this square reference surface. We want to draw an arc so that instead of a continuous timber post vertically, we're going to draw the arc to create the full dome structure. So we're going to go to the arc tool. We're going to set it up vertically. We're going to go to our endpoint at the bottom, and then we're going to curve it up to the top. So that is now our arc. We don't need this reference and these other reference lines anymore. We can get rid of those. And now if we draw a small circle here, and we set out to use the follow me tool, and we follow the curve, of course this gives us the curve of the timber post or the timber framework. However, within this framework, we have now drawn the line that we referenced to draw the curved timber. We drew that line on the very edge of our floor. And that is of course not possible because our timber post is to sit in the middle of that framework of the wall. So let's move this 75 millimeters in, because our wall is 150 millimeters thick. Let's draw the arch again, starting here, going up there. And then of course our arch is a little bit less high, not a full 3 meters high, which is fine. We can make an adjustment for that. And now we will do a 50 millimeter post, but 50 millimeters might be a little bit too thick. Let's do 30 millimeters. And then instead of doing a face selection and then following the curve, we're going to select the curve, then the follow me tool, and then the face. And then it automatically curves it for us along that line. We've selected the bamboo material again, not a pine material, sorry about that, that is actually bamboo. And what we're going to do is, now having painted this beam, we're going to copy this beam and we're going to name this sapling. This might actually be quite thick for a sapling, but let's make use of it anyway. We're now setting the saplings out at 20 degrees instead of 10, so we can copy this 18 times, and then the software crashed. Okay, let's start up SketchUp again, not Skype, SketchUp. Apologies for that, but that is unfortunately something that can happen. I don't get the feeling that SketchUp is starting properly, so let me go to my... No, it is on its way. There we go. As you can see, even though I started working on this file today without saving it, it has shown up as an untitled file which has been recovered. The last time it saved was at 5 minutes past 8. So let's open that up. And let's, for all intents and purposes, make sure that we actually do save our file. So as soon as this has loaded, with a few minutes spare of what we were working on, let's save this as African desktop, African Beehive Hut. All right. Then we have to repeat a few steps. So we were just short of our arc. I'm going to keep the line of the arc, get rid of everything else, paste it back in place, draw a circle at 30 millimeters, select the curve, select the follow me tool, and select the circle. Select the whole post, the sapling that was bending to the center of our circle. Let's find center. And we can select the midpoint here. Drag this 20 degrees over, copy it 18 times, and there we go. Let's delete the center post that we drew. Let's delete the line that we had for reference. And then this is basically our second option. So let's do that. Let's copy the floor over to the hut. And let's move this one slightly back, including all the objects. What was this distance? 2 meters. Okay, let's move this 2 meters over. And then let's move you precisely 18 meters back. All right, so now we have a few more steps. We have the starting point, measuring the circle, clearing the ground, laying the floor, building the wall. And what we're effectively saying is that once we build the wall, let's move this over and make a copy of this one. Remove the posts here. What I'm saying is that after the wall, we can either build the domed structure straight away with the bent saplings, or we can start with the timber structure first and go from there. Now, of course, my saplings here are starting to bend much sooner than the curvature of the wall. So perhaps our wall is a little bit too high in this example. So we're going to make a copy of this unit, and we're just going to take the selection of the wall and scale it using the scale tool, which doesn't, okay, there it goes. The scale tool, we could probably, before the sapling starts curving too far out, we can go to about half the height. But as you can see, as I use the scale tool, it sort of compresses my texture. So that's not really the result that we want. If we decrease this in height, so we go to the midpoint, we're going to lose 450 millimeters. But it's not making use of those first two parts, which we would want to use. So I'm going to just erase those lines to create a continuous surface and then drag this 450 millimeters down. Okay, so that gives us a much better result, which means we can get rid of that and just copy the wall over so that we are continuing along the same lines. Now, on top of this structure, we would then find the thatch. So let's make a first step towards creating the thatch. And in the differences between these huts, along the curvature here, we would need to create a dome that sits on top of our saplings. Now there is a substructure required in these buildings, and as far as what I can see when I'm going through these references, is it would basically be a secondary layer of saplings called framing saplings. So not the posts, and then after the framing is done, we can lay on top of that the grass. Now for the framing, we would have to take a few more steps. Not necessarily difficult steps, but let's make a copy of the floor and paste that in place, and then we can drag that floor up. And what we're going to do is we'll drag it up in segmentations or increments of 500 millimeter, and we'll do another one as a copy, and we'll do that 3 times, not that 4 times. Yep. And then what we could do is we could use the offset tool to say, all right, without necessarily measuring this extremely exactly, this would be our intersection point. And if we then get rid of the outer diameter or the outer circumference line, then what we are left with is the inside line of the thickness, of the saplings that will curve around the structure. And we can do that in increments here, delete the outside line, and here, delete the outside line, and one more here. And perhaps even here, even though it's a minimal difference, and delete the outside line. So now we're really starting to see that beehive kind of structure take shape, and we don't need these faces, we just need the line work. And so with these increments, we can see how the structure allowed for the positioning of the grass mats that would cover the hut. Without drawing all of these lines out, what I'm going to do is I'm going to make that copy, and I'm going to start us off with a very simple dome. And that wonderful reference point that we had earlier in these steps were the reference points to draw the arc that we created for the sapling. So now that we no longer have those, we would have to recreate that. And we know that it was a vertical rectangle, vertical square, measuring 2750 by 2750 because of the arc of the sapling in relation to the thickness of the wall. So for the 2750, what we can do is, of course, we have to make this a little bit bigger because the grass is going to sit on the outside of the posts. And the sapling was 30 millimeters thick, so we're going to move this 30 millimeters over. Sorry, the radius was 30 millimeters. And we're going to draw the arc again. Am I measuring that correctly? Yes, that's 2780. Maybe something went wrong when I drew the rectangle vertically. This should be 2780. It is not. Okay, well, we have a reference face. Let's use it while we can, and when we no longer need it, let's get rid of it. And you can see that the curve sort of auto heals. It's no longer broken up. And we actually do want to keep the face this time. Let's draw a new line from top to bottom. And that is now our face. And let's move the face back to the center here. It was 75 in minus the 30 is 45. And if we draw a circle in line with that, that was a bit too quick. Let's snap to the outside and make a group of that object. Then I have a shortcut where I can hide the rest of the model pressing the letter X. If you want to set up a shortcut, you can go to Window, go to Preferences, and then go to Shortcuts, and then search, or filter, I should say, filter the commands, type in the word hide, and then you can see here, View Component, Edit, Hide Rest of Model. And to that I assigned the letter X. Basically, you add a shortcut by selecting the keystroke on your keyboard, inserting that here, and then pressing the plus sign to insert it. Of course, mine already has, so I don't have to redo that. If I then do that, then by pressing letter X, it will hide everything else. For now, we want to take this surface, not this face. We want to take this surface and say this is the follow me command. We want to take this radius, this circumference of a circle, and we want to take the follow me tool and say this is the dome that we want to create. So just to show you that step one more time, I select the circumference of the outer circle, including this part here. Then I select the follow me tool and then the face that I want to copy over. And I don't need the bottom because the bottom is not getting thatched grass. And then if I delete this line, it breaks my shape. And if I delete this line, it breaks my shape. So what can we do? We can make a selection of just the line and then press the hide command. So the line is still there as it is with all the other surfaces. And we can do the same here, select this line and also hide it, so that the dome looks rather clean. Now for some reason it is giving me that sort of strange step in the geometry where everything looks smooth and this looks like it has an edge. So what we're going to do is go to Soften Edges and just turn on Soften the coplanar, and now the whole object looks smooth. It looks like it's not sitting particularly well placed in the diameter of our structure. So we're just going to move that up. And it seems like whatever measurement I thought I had correctly drawn, I have clearly not drawn correctly. And something has gone askew. So we're going to use the scale tool to scale this up to the post here. And that sits now on the edge. Then we do the same thing on this corner. And then we'll have to do the same on this corner. And apart from our entrance, if I press the letter K, I can see all the hidden line work. Our structure seems to be covered, but it's a little bit too steep now. We can't go to 0.9, but maybe 0.91. Yeah, now it's just over. And then let's go to the material browser. Let's type in the word thatch. or basically thatched roofing. Thatch, material, thatching, palm thatching, and I suppose what this will be is normal thatching. These textures are beautifully sized, and if we apply that, the thatch is now applied to the structure. Of course, we need to cut out a sort of dome or arc shaped opening so that we can actually enter our space. And what we would probably do is we'd probably have to cut through one of the saplings that is used to frame horizontally our shape. So what we're going to do is we're going to copy again the whole project, and then we can of course turn on view hidden geometry, and then just for reference I'm going to make this object white again, otherwise it's so difficult to see the hidden lines. Now what we could do is we could cut this piece out, and this piece out, and that piece out, and that piece out, and then we would have an opening. But that's probably not as realistic as the curved arched openings that are used in this form of architecture. So let's rather draw a line across here. So that is the entrance to the opening. And we're going to draw a line vertical, let's say 1.5 meters high. That line just jumped out of place. I wonder where that line went. Let's go vertical. I'm going to press the up arrow key so that it locks me into place. And then from the top to the bottom, I'm going to draw a rectangle like that. So if I now pull this tool in, I could create an intersection between these two surfaces, and I could create a cutout to the shape of the rectangle. Now, as I mentioned just now, this will have a domed shaped opening. So our 1500 cut in half is 750. Or sorry, it's not 1500 across. What is this across? 1042. Okay. 1042 is 521. So that is half the width in height. And then if we use the second arch tool, we can go from corner to corner and then draw out a shape like that. So now we have an arch on top of our surface, or on top of our opening. And we can still select the arch, and let's refine that from 12 segments to 18, or maybe even to 24, so that it looks as smooth as possible. And now we can push-pull this shape. I'm going to just drag it forward a little bit, just to make sure that it cuts through everything. I'm going to push-pull it through our dome. And then if I press the letter K, you can see it clearly goes through the dome-shaped surface. And then we're going to go into our group here. We can actually turn off the hidden geometry. We can select the surface, right-click, intersect the faces with the model, and then it cuts that shape out. So if we delete this segment now, we have a clean cut. The texture of the thatching is actually still on the inside. We'll bring it back on the outside. We can then triple click this geometry that we created, and then this would be our opening. These lines that show the horizontal framing of our thatched beehive home, these lines would also be, of course, cut. So maybe we can bring the structure back, hide the thatching for a moment, select this line and say, please intersect with the geometry. And in this case, we can just explode the curve, and we can explode that curve. And then if we right click it again, we can intersect it with the model. There are no faces. No, that is correct. What I'll do is I'm just going to draw a reference line vertically between these 2 points. and the same on the opposite side. And then I'm going to delete the two faces here. And then you can see I can slowly start removing these reference lines and the additional lines that were drawn here. And if you find it too difficult in this scenario to actually see the lines individually with the black contrasting against the gray, you might as well change to sort of a default white on black style. And then remove that and remove that. Then we can go back to our ambient occlusion style. We can unhide the dome, and then this is in 2, 4, 6, 8, 9 steps. Maybe that's on 10. In 10 steps, the process of creating a domed beehive Zulu meets Xhosa architecture home. And if we go back to the start, a few things I want to point out to you is at the moment you can see in the style menu on the right hand side, I'm using the ambient occlusion set. So this is the latest visualization tool in SketchUp 2024. And there's nothing that you can specifically see different here. But as you can see, when I start to draw objects on the ground surface, if I turn the ambient occlusion off, I can go to View, Face Style, Ambient Occlusion. If I turn that off, I lose that shade line, that shadow line underneath my object. So let me turn it back on, go to Face Styles, turn on Ambient Occlusion, and there it's back. I can also turn the shadows on, so View Shadows. You can see the shadows on top of our object together with the ambient occlusion and the shadow line. And if I turn shadows off, but go to the shadow submenu, I can also say that we want to use the sun for shading. So you can see this gives us a nice balance between the ambient occlusion and a little bit of a lighter surface area. And you can see it contrasted here quite nicely. The ambient occlusion is there, and the ground surface, of course, now has been created by us. And that ambient occlusion continues along each 3D object where surfaces meet. So it gives a nice sense of depth perspective. And it continues now on the outside and on the inside. Please also take note that if I remove the ground cover, if I remove the earth, the floor of the floor, then we lose that bottom ambient occlusion here. So if there's no ground surface drawn, the bottom of your object sort of floats in empty space, and only the ambient occlusion shading is visible here between the floor and the wall. So if I unhide that ground surface, then it comes back here. Moving over to our substructures, our timber posting and our saplings bending into the arched frame, the ambient occlusion is now also visible around the pole. There's no ambient occlusion on line work. There's no real visibility other than the edge of our thatching. And then we can see the same result here. You can see quite a nice bit of ambient occlusion around each post, where the post is closest to the thatching, it is strongest, and then it fades as it goes up. So this is a wonderful way to perceive some form of depth, and of course there's no thickness to it thatching just yet, but these are some of the steps that we can take. So the ambient occlusion menu as part of a styles group in our style settings can also be edited under the edit menu, and then the face style becomes visible here with a submenu. And the distance and the intensity of the ambient occlusion can be changed. So we're just going to look at interior versus exterior at the same time. If I increase the distance, you can see that it covers more distance, it becomes stronger. And if I increase the intensity, it becomes darker in its gradient style. So the style that we had selected at present was the interior style. So you can see how the distance is shortened. And we can also switch to the exterior style. So now the distance is a bit longer. And you can see it already then introduces a gray infinite floor and a blue gradient sky. So that's also a wonderful feature to get a more realistic look and feel to our model. That's all for today's video. If you've got any comments or questions, or you understand this form of architecture much better than I do, please leave some notes so I can use it in further videos. If you've enjoyed this video and there's another type of African structure that you would like me to model out, please make your recommendations also in the comments, and I will see you for another session next month.